Hey, this is Julie Bacon, and this is Just Be Real with Julie, where we have real conversations about connection and what it takes to feel connected in a disconnected world. Let's get to it. Hey, hello everybody. Welcome back to Just Be Real with Julie. Before we jump in today, I want to say something. If you've been wondering where I've been, first of all, thank you. Thank you for noticing. And thanks for sticking around. This podcast has been quiet for a while. And it wasn't because I stopped caring. Honestly, it was actually the opposite of that. You know, I've always been the type of person that has had very high expectations for myself. And honestly, sometimes to a fault. But there was something about my podcast that just wasn't hitting home for me. I wasn't sure what it was, but I thought, Julie, don't just put out content to put out content. It has to matter or it's not useful. And so I've been doing a lot of listening and learning and wrestling with some big questions. Because honestly, I feel like I learn right alongside of you. I decided that I would give myself permission to slow down. And looking back, my message has become clearer. So I'm really grateful that I did that. This podcast, it's not just about sharing ideas or teaching you a lesson. That's not what I want it to be. I want this podcast to be something where you and I get together and we simply explore life together. We ask better questions. We talk about how to notice the things we've stopped noticing. And together we try to make sense of a world that seems to be moving faster every day. And no, I don't have all the answers. And I honestly, I don't want to even pretend that I do. But I feel like I have finally found the heartbeat of what Just Be Real with Julie was always meant to become. So if you're new here, welcome aboard. I'm so happy. And if you've been here from the beginning, thank you. I'm super glad you're here. I want to ask you something. Have you ever noticed how people now don't seem to genuinely get excited anymore? Not the way we used to. Now it's like if someone gets engaged, congratulations. Someone gets a promotion, well, that's awesome. Another major world event happens again. And another new technology changes the way we live. And our response is, well, I guess that was coming. It's almost as though nothing really shocks us anymore. And I don't think it's because people don't care. I think we are just exhausted. We're the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix or that coffee remedies. I'm talking about something that's much deeper. Mental, emotional, maybe even spiritual. And that made me wonder, what if nothing is actually wrong with us? What if instead we're responding exactly the way human beings would be expected to respond after years of constant stimulation, constant uncertainty, and constant demands of our attention? I think we're overloaded, ladies and gentlemen. You've probably heard that old story about the frog in the pot of water. And the idea is that if the water heats up slowly enough, the frog doesn't notice until it's too late. Now, biologists will tell you that's actually not true, but a real frog would jump out. I think the story has lasted all of this time because psychologically it feels true. And not about frogs, about us. The biggest changes in our lives rarely happen all at once. They happen gradually. One small adjustment, one new habit, one new expectation, one convenient feature at a time. Think about your phone. Do you remember when a cell phone was just a phone? The only way it was really different from your home phone was that it didn't hang on the wall and it could fit in your pocket. You made calls and that was about it. Sometimes maybe a text if you had 10 minutes to send one sentence, because that's how long it took. That was about it. That's all it did. But now, think about this. Now, your phone is your calendar, bank, camera, map, entertainment, shopping mall, work, social life, memories, your alarm clock, and for many of us, the first thing that we touch in the morning and the last thing we touch at night. It didn't happen overnight. It happened one useful little feature at a time. And I think that modern life has happened to us in much the same way. Imagine that someone hands you a backpack with one small rock inside. You barely notice it. And then the next day, another rock, and then another and another. Well, that's the same thing as technology. Emails, notifications, work stress, financial pressure, family responsibilities, health concerns, news alerts, text messages, social media, breaking news, another and another and another and another, until one day you wake up exhausted and you can't point to one single reason why. It wasn't one rock. It was the weight of all of them. That is what I think many of us are carrying. Not one overwhelming event, just 1,000 tiny demands. And somewhere along the way, we stopped remembering what it felt like to move through life without all of that weight. So today, I want to slow down long enough to notice it. Not to blame technology or pretend that life was perfect in the past, and not to tell you that you need to throw away your phone and go live in the woods. So, although I think that would be fun, actually. I just simply want to ask one question. What is all of this doing to us? Because before we can decide what needs to change, I think we first have to recognize what has already changed. And maybe that's where we begin. Not with fixing everything or judging ourselves, but just by becoming willing to notice. I want to share something else that I've been noticing. And I have a feeling that you may have noticed it too. Have you ever read a headline that 10 years ago would have completely stopped you in your tracks, and now you barely react? Another natural disaster, another economic warning or political battle, another cyber attack, another company laying off thousands of employees, another breakthrough in artificial intelligence, another data breach exposing millions of people's information. And you glance at it all, and now maybe you shake your head. And then you just keep scrolling. And a few seconds later, you're looking at someone's vacation pictures, and then a recipe and a political argument and a video of a puppy doing something ridiculous. 1 minute you're reading about something devastating happening on the other side of the world, and the next you're watching someone organize their stinking refrigerator. And somehow your brain is expected to process all of it as though it belongs in the same conversation. I caught myself doing this recently. I read something that should have stayed with me. It was serious. The kind of thing that, well, not long ago probably would have been the subject of every conversation for the rest of the day. But before I had even finished absorbing it, my attention had already moved somewhere else. A few minutes later, I couldn't even remember exactly what I had read. And that bothered me. And not because I didn't care, I did care. At least, well, I think I did. But I didn't have enough time to feel anything before the next thing arrived. And that got me wondering, are we becoming less compassionate? Are we losing our ability to care? Or are our brains just simply overwhelmed by how much they're being asked to process? Because before we've even finished our first cup of coffee, we may already have been exposed to someone's vacation, a murder trial, 3 advertisements, a weather alert, a celebrity divorce, a stock market update, a war, a family member's illness, a medical breakthrough, a conspiracy theory, a joke, a tragedy, and thankfully, at least one puppy. Doesn't it sound ridiculous when you say it? But that's true. And that's all before 9 o'clock in the morning. No wonder our minds feel crowded, for goodness sake. No wonder some days we feel emotionally numb. For a while, I wondered whether something was wrong with us. Why don't we react the way we used to? Why do things that once would have shocked us barely make us pause anymore? And then I learned something that changed the way I looked at it. Our brains may not be failing us. They may be protecting us. Think about a smoke detector. The first time it goes off, your entire body reacts. Remember in elementary school when they would have fire drills and, oh my gosh, that alarm would go off and everybody would nearly jump out of their seats in the classroom and, of course, cover their ears and file out. Your heart starts racing and adrenaline floods your system and you jump up and immediately you're looking for danger. Now, imagine that same smoke detector goes off every 20 minutes, whether there's any smoke or not. Eventually, something changes. Not the alarm. You stop reacting. You might even start ignoring it. Psychologists call that habituation. It simply means that when we're exposed to the same type of stimulus over and over, our response gradually decreases. And it's actually one of the ways our brains help us survive. Imagine trying to live every day with the same emotional intensity that you felt during the first major crisis of your life. You couldn't. Your nervous system learns how to turn down the volume so you can keep functioning. But here's where I think it gets complicated. Today's world can feel like one continuous alarm. Everything is urgent. Everything is breaking. Everything is unprecedented. Everything demands our attention. And when everything becomes an emergency, eventually, nothing feels like one. And that doesn't mean that we've stopped caring. It may mean we've just reached our capacity. And I think there's a difference. Information itself is not the problem because we know that knowledge is good and learning is good and being informed matters. But there comes a point when information stops informing us and starts flooding us. It reminds me of trying to drink from a fire hose. The water itself is not bad. There's simply just too much of it coming out at you too quickly. And our brains are not only processing the amount of information, they're also being asked to switch constantly between completely different kinds of information. You answer an email, then you check a text, then you go back to work. A notification pops up. You check that. Then someone sends you a video. Then you remember something you need to order, and then another message comes through, and then you try to return to whatever you were doing before all of that started. And if you're like me, holy crap, I can't remember what I started out to do anyway. No, it's not age. Stop thinking that. It's overstimulation. We call it multitasking, but most of the time, our brains are not actually doing several things at once. They are switching rapidly from one thing to another. And every time they switch, they have to find their place again. Psychologists call that a switching cost. Every interruption takes a little bit of mental energy. That may be why you can spend an entire day feeling incredibly busy and still wonder what you actually accomplished. You were not necessarily lazy. Your attention may simply have been fragmented. It's like trying to read a book while someone interrupts you every 2 minutes. Eventually, you stop remembering what you just read. Now, imagine your entire day working that way. No wonder we're exhausted. And then, after making hundreds of tiny decisions all day, we finally sit down at night and open Netflix and scroll for 30 minutes and say, I don't even care anymore. Just pick something. It's not because we have no preferences. It's just because our brains are tired of choosing. Have you ever given your child the opportunity to choose a candy bar as you're going through the register at the grocery store? You know, they have those racks and there's like 10, 12, 15 different kinds of candy bars there. And you have a huge cart of groceries and they're being checked out. And you get to the end of the cart and the kid still hasn't been able to pick out the damn candy bar yet. And you're like, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Well, the reason is because there are too many choices. That's why you present this or that. And imagine if we did that for ourselves. Imagine if we said, okay, I'm either going to do this or I'm going to do that right now. And I'm going to block everything else out. It'd make it easier to choose, wouldn't it? We're making choices all the time. What should I wear? What should I eat? Should I answer this now? Should I save that? Should I click this? Oh no, should I worry about that? Should I even respond? Should I buy it? Should I share this? And by the end of the day, even choosing a television show can feel like one decision too many. But there's something else that I've been thinking about. I miss wonder. Do you? I remember when GPS first became widely available, and I just thought, oh my God, this is unbelievable. A little tiny device can tell me exactly where I am, and it can guide me somewhere I've never been. It felt like science fiction, you know? But now, if it takes 5 minutes to 5 seconds to reroute me, I get pissed off. And that happens a lot because I show a lot of new construction and GPS is very confusing in those new neighborhoods. But it's just funny how quickly something amazing nowadays just becomes ordinary. And the thing is, the technology did not stop being incredible. We just got used to it, and the extraordinary became expected. And I wonder how often that happens in other parts of our lives too. A few weeks ago, I was sitting in a restaurant and I looked around the room. There were families together. There were couples on dates, friends sharing a meal, people who had intentionally chosen to spend time with one another. And almost every single table had at least one person looking down at a screen. Nobody looked unhappy. That's was not what struck me. It just felt different. It reminded me of how we would sit around my Grandma Heitschuh's table on Sunday morning when we would arrive each weekend for Sunday dinner with everybody else when I was growing up. And nobody had a phone. Not because they were more disciplined. It was because phones like what we have now, well, heck, they didn't exist. If someone told a story, everybody at the table heard it. If someone laughed, everyone laughed. If there was a silence, nobody felt obligated immediately to try and fill it. The silence wasn't awkward. It was simply part of being together. And I'm not saying that we should go backward. I love technology. I use it every day. I mean, this podcast exists because of technology. I don't believe the answer is to reject progress, but I do think it is super healthy to ask, what have we gained? And what have we quietly lost? Because progress often gives us incredible new abilities while slowly changing the experiences that we never even realized we would miss. And underneath all of this, the noise and the exhaustion and the endless information, I think that there is something else happening. I think many of us are searching for certainty. We want to know what is going to happen. We want to know that the people we love will be okay. We want to know that our jobs are secure, our relationships are stable, our health is fine, and the ground beneath us is not about to shift again. And honestly, who could blame us? Think about it. I mean, oh my God, the world has changed so much, so quickly, that many of us barely had time to process one version of reality before the next one arrived. Technology changes, work changes, relationship changes, the language changes, the rules change, the information changes, and sometimes even the truth seems to change depending on who's telling the story. So we search and we scroll, we compare. We read one more article or watch just one more video. We listen to one more person explain what is really happening. And for a moment, we may feel more informed. But do we actually feel more certain? Or do we sometimes walk away with 10 new questions and a slightly elevated heart rate? That's me. Maybe it's just me. But I have noticed that the more desperate I become for certainty, the more vulnerable I become to anyone who speaks with confidence. Not necessarily accuracy, confidence, because confidence feels reassuring when everything else feels unclear. And when someone says, I know exactly what is happening, part of us really wants to believe them. And it's not because we're gullible. It's because uncertainty is really uncomfortable. Our brain loves patterns. Our brains love explanations. They like beginnings, middles, and endings. Our brains like cause and effect. They like to know who's right and who's wrong and what happens next. But the thing is, real life does not always give us that. Sometimes there's no clean answer. Sometimes two things can be true at once. Sometimes the person who hurt us also loved us. Excuse me. Sometimes a decision can be necessary and still be very, very painful. Sometimes we can be grateful and grieving, hopeful and scared. Sometimes we can know that something needs to change without knowing yet what the change is supposed to look like. And maybe part of what is exhausting us is not only uncertainty itself. Maybe it's the pressure that we place on ourselves to eliminate the uncertainty. We keep thinking that once we understand everything, predict everything, and control everything, then we will finally be able to relax. But what if that moment never comes? What if peace doesn't arrive because the world finally becomes predictable? What if it begins when we stop requiring certainty before we allow ourselves to live? I have really been practicing living in the moment. And I have really, over the last several months, been practicing releasing the need for control of knowing how a certain situation is going to end or trying to control how it does end. Instead, I have found that when I just sit back and I use that feeling of, I refer to it as faith. Maybe it's really just the ability to sit back and not require an answer, but we let things unfold naturally, then I'm not so stressed because I'm not trying to manipulate the circumstance or the answer or the outcome. I'm just waiting because I know it will unfold as it should. I don't mean becoming careless, and I don't mean ignoring reality either. And I definitely don't mean pretending that everything's fine when it's not. I just mean becoming more intentional about what we allow into our minds. And when we give our energy to, and how often we step away long enough to hear our own thoughts again. Because sometimes we're not actually responding to our lives, we're responding to the noise surrounding our lives. Those headlines, the comments, the predictions, the opinions, the expectations, the endless stream of people telling us what we should fear, what we should want, who we should be, and how far behind we are. And after a while, it becomes difficult to tell the difference between what we truly believe and what we have simply heard repeatedly. And that's the part that I keep coming back to. How much of what we call our life is actually being chosen by us, and how much of it is happening automatically? We're not weak, and we're not doing anything wrong. But repetition becomes familiarity, and familiarity can start to feel like truth if we let it. Maybe that's why so many people feel like they're surviving instead of living these days, because they're moving and working and paying bills and answering messages and completing tasks. And they're keeping everyone else afloat. But somewhere underneath all of that activity, there is a quiet question. And I encourage you to slow down at some point and ask yourself this. Is this actually the life that I want to be living? And that's not an easy question. It can be inconvenient and very uncomfortable. And it can reveal things that we're not ready to change yet. But I don't think that asking that question means that we have to blow up our lives. I think it just means that we've become curious about them. Maybe we begin by noticing which parts of our day make us feel most like ourselves and which parts make us feel like we are disappearing. A lot of the decisions we've made about the most important parts of our lives were made at a time when our life was completely different than it is now. And maybe some of those decisions that we made really don't feel like ours anymore. But have you slowed down long enough to figure out if they do or if they don't? Maybe we notice the difference between being tired because we worked hard and being tired because we've been performing or pretending or carrying something that really doesn't belong to us. Maybe we notice what we reach for when we feel uncomfortable. Maybe we notice whose voice we hear when we criticize ourselves. Maybe we notice whether our choices are moving us toward the person we want to become, or simply helping us avoid what we do not want to feel. Not to judge ourselves, not to immediately change everything, but just to notice. Because I'm beginning to believe that most transformation doesn't begin with a giant decision. It just begins with a simple moment of honest recognition. A moment when we stop long enough to say, there it is. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm feeling. Or that's what I've been avoiding. Or that is really what I actually want. And once we see something clearly, it becomes much harder to unknow it. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't mean that we change overnight. And it doesn't mean that we suddenly have all the answers. But what it does do is it gives us a starting point. And maybe that is what many of us are missing, a starting point. When you don't know where to start, it's hard to leap because fear takes over. And sometimes even when you know that it's time to leap and you know where the starting point is, it's still scary to start. But it's a way to come back to ourselves before the world tells us who we are supposed to be. So here's something that I would like for you to notice this week. Not fix or judge, just notice it. Pay attention to one moment when everything around you gets quiet. You might be sitting in your car or standing in line. Maybe you're waiting for someone or you're lying in bed before you fall asleep. Notice what you do next. Do you immediately reach for your phone? Turn on music? Check a message? Look for something to fill that space? Or can you let the silence stay for a moment? There's really no right or wrong answer. It's just a point that's simple to notice. Because awareness begins before change does. And here's the question that I want you to carry with you. Where in your life have you become so accustomed to constant stimulation that silence now feels uncomfortable? And maybe the deeper question is, what might you hear if you let the silence stay? Because sometimes the loudest thing in our lives is not the world around us. Sometimes it is how little space we have left to hear ourselves think. And in the next episode, I want to take this conversation one step further, because the world did not become this fast and demanding all at once. A lot of it happened through things that were designed to make our lives easier. You know, like Amazon deliveries, instant answers, one-click purchases, automatic renewals, entertainment whenever we want it. And I love many of those things. But I've started wondering, when did convenience stop simply helping us and start quietly changing what we expect from life? That is where we're going next. Thank you so much for being here. And remember, real moments, real people, real connections still matter. This is Just Be Real with Julie, and I will see you next time. Oh, One more thing before you go this week. Give yourself one quiet moment. Don't fill it. Don't fix anything. Just notice what comes up. I'll be curious what you discover. Take care. If this resonated with you, subscribe and stay for the conversation. We're rebuilding connection from the inside out, and we're putting the human back in humanity. I'm Julie, and I'll see you in the next one.